Cool. Well, let's get right to it, George. Thanks for joining me. I always say to candidates that are running for office, that's a big, sacrifice and a big dedication of yourself to civic service. And so I'm very thankful for you stepping up and running, and especially to care about the issues and to be a voice and be a face for the movement. So George, tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of where you're running, and before we get into all the redistricting stuff. But I'd love to just get a background of who you are.
Sure. So born and raised in New York City in the borough of Queens. I'm still currently a resident of Queens County, soon to become a Nassau County resident, something that's been a long time in the making.
Mm-hmm.
33 years old, first generation born American, both parents immigrants to this country. From a young age, life wasn't easy. And the decision to change came really from me and from just watching my parents work really hard to do what they could for us, for my sister and I. And I always considered, there's no such thing as well-educated people who don't do well in life. And at a very young age, I used education as a springboard out of poverty, out of, status quo.
Right.
The one at least I was dealt, right? So I'm a big believer in education being the springboard out of a lot of the hurt that people suffer in this country. Big advocate for promoting education. So again, a little bit of my personal life. Professionally, private equity background, have worked in several Fortune 500, even actually Fortune 100 companies in finance. I've led various different major projects. I've taken advantage of the fact that I'm trilingual and that I'm able to deliver a unique perspective when doing business. And I have actually fundamental business understanding in various regions in the globe. So I famously was able to interject myself into one of the largest mergers and acquisitions of our lifetime, which was the Heinz Group, when they decided to sell to the Japanese Brazilian company Yoki. I was the only person they can reach that actually had some experience in M&A, that spoke fluent Portuguese, fluent English, and was able to go in between both countries with very little ease because I have both passports. So being a dual citizen also was very helpful to me. And things like that I was afforded were always very instrumental at my success. So I've gone from multi-billion-dollar M&A deals to raising small, mid-sized funds in private equity, from real estate, biotech, life science. So because of my finance background, I happen to accumulate a lot of understanding and knowledge, even if superficial, but in various sectors. So I understand life sciences, I understand healthcare, I understand vaccine technology and development and funding and whatnot, and all the
I think a lot of the audience should know that, in finance, especially when you're dealing with these companies, a lot of research needs to be done. So you end up becoming very knowledgeable about the different industries and sectors that you're representing as your clients. So it's really, really nice to see that you're bringing that, to the mix. I think I want to get to our, thanks for sharing the background on you. Very impressive. Are you Brazilian American? Is that your...
let's just call it, to keep it simple, yes, let's call it that.
Okay, so you're dual citizen of both Brazil and US.
Yep. Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's and a huge country too, one of the biggest economies in the world. So
yep.
Yeah, it's great. And let me just ask you this: Brazil is a free economy, right? It's one that's that has not gone the route of Venezuela or Peru or any of the other South American countries that have kind of fallen to communism in recent years.
Yes, for now it is a free economy. Brazil dabbled in pretty obscure lines for 12 years in a socialist manner, never really communism, but there is a true fear that it can go that route, depending on the results of the election this November. Their presidential election is up on the ballot around the same time that we're up here for the midterms.
Oh, so that'll be very interesting to watch. Now, you are very knowledgeable apparently about the redistricting that's going on. And and I'm pretty much a political geek, but, I always defer to the locals that understand what's going on as far as the districts go. And I can share you this with California is, they created a lot more swing districts with this arrogance that they think that they can win more seats. But in New York, what the conventional wisdom is right now, and I know that the courts may overturn it, but the current map that is drawn is looking like a 22 seat for the Democrats. 19, they currently hold 19, and then Republicans hold 8. But what it's looking like is you're going to lose a seat, but the Democrats will still gain 3 seats. So that's basically a net 4 loss for Republicans. What are your thoughts on it? And maybe if there's anything wrong that I said, feel free to correct me. But that's what I've been hearing on the street.
So very accurate statement. In New York State, we have approximately 3 million registered Republicans. A majority of them are upstate New York over the Hudson Valley line. However, there's still a very good concentration of Republicans on Long Island, as we jokingly say, upstate Long Island. So that's the joke. In all fairness, and I'll be very fair on this, is the way redistricting is taking place in New York is absolutely, it violates the state constitution. It violates the VRA, period. There's no question about that. And the funny thing is, and I find myself at the center of this because my district is the scapegoat essentially for all the major lawsuits, because it was the most grotesquely gerrymandered district in the state. You got me from a landmass of an island, instead of extending me, and if you want to extend me into an outside of Long Island, you can go into Queens, which geographically speaking is attached to Long Island. Queens is technically part of Long Island, although it's a borough of New York City. That said, they chose to rat trail me from Long Island all the way up into Westchester County. And the problem with that is that on the state constitution, it states that districts will be drawn in land masses contiguously unless it is a peninsula. The problem is there is a skewed understanding from a ruling back in 2008 that was an argument that Long Island was a peninsula. The problem is it's not a peninsula to the effect that let's remember, they're excluding Queens from that peninsula, which is in that ruling, that opinion, pardon me, not a ruling, an opinion. So within that opinion, they state the counties of Suffolk, Nassau, and Queens form what is oftenly known as Long Island. And it is a peninsula because there are various little connections between Queens and Nassau County, Queens and the rest of the city, Brooklyn and whatnot. There's tons of little rivers and streams that cut it up. So they made that opinion in 2008. So the state legislators trying to say, well, because Long Island is a peninsula, we have to reach out. What they did was skip Queens, essentially, used it for the access point of a bridge into the Bronx, then from the Bronx, an overpass access into Westchester County. That is exactly what the legislator did. So that violates the state constitution, thoroughly. And we have really good standing for the lawsuits, but let's just pretend here we lose our lawsuits and these maps stay. I'm telling you, and I don't want to sound arrogant, I want to be humble and accept this as a difficult task, but I will win this district in 2022. I've put the work in. I understand what the people need and what they want and what their issues are. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, to bring in these different personality candidates that are trying to jump in, I just don't think they understand the most important thing is that the sentiment of the public is not with them. They're not anti-police. They are not pro-criminal. And the messaging that the Democrat Party has been sending here in New York has been all pro-criminal, pro-bill reform. And it's absolutely out of touch with the constituency. And to add insult to injury, we have Joe Biden, which is the most aggressive Republican operative in the history of politics. So,
You're
so
funny.
that's where we stand on the maps. And one thing that is worth pointing out is there's also a very bad violation of the VRA, Voter Riders Act, if I'm not mistaken, Mark, you might know this, but is it 64 that went
Yes,
into?
I think so.
So
Yeah.
the 1964 VRA, where you can't disenfranchise communities. Now, this district is a very affluent area and is heavily, not by design or by gerrymandering, it is heavily Caucasian, right? It is a district where that is the predominant race. And when you're drawing this district and carving it up into communities like Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, Mamaroneck, where there is a population of African Americans that are currently in a district where they are the majority. You hear that? That's a very important
Taking them
point.
out of that
They're
district.
taking them out
diluting
of
them.
they're
The vote.
diluting their representation and putting them in a super minority district. That is voter disenfranchisement. I'm advocating this
George,
for those people. Go ahead.
Yeah, and let me be clear, George, you're actually optimistic that these lawsuits, especially with VRA as an argument, is going to be to overturn the map and it will be sent back to be redrawn. Is that what
I am very positive that a federal magistrate will be drawing these maps again, like they have in the last 2 decades. So it wouldn't be different this time around. It wouldn't be very different.
So you're thinking that your district will be very similar to the current district in the end?
Well, if it stays very similar to the current district, then that would make it a Republican district as it stands today.
Got it. Okay. And you know what I wanted to chat with you about also is the overall trends, especially during the Trump presidency, in lots of suburbs in the rest of the country kind of moved left or moved bluer because of Trump, like, where I'm from, Orange County, California, or also, places like Cobb County, Georgia, or Texas suburbs in Dallas and Houston. But Long Island seemed to buck that trend. Long Island actually became more Republican and more red during the Trump presidency. And I believe Lee Zeldin is one of the congressmen that's hung on to the seat there. And Republicans have made a lot of local inroads, including winning back that Staten Island seat. I mean, tell me a little more about kind of the overall sentiment in the New York suburbs. And now that Trump is gone, what is there residue, resentment towards Biden? And, the suburbs seem to rally for Trump the last, or the Republican Party or the red team pretty much for the last few cycles. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, George.
So let's look at it this way. Loudoun County, Virginia. Who would have ever thought a Republican would have won, right? Trump was involved. Trump endorsed Glenn Youngkin, and it was very successful. I think what happened is, and these are my opinions, and I've always been a very big supporter of President Trump, and I've never shied away from that. I think, to call a spade, he was the most consequentially beneficial president based on his policies this country has seen in a very long time. And to dismiss that as just plain arrogance and plain, negligence. What happened during the Trump presidency was as people call it, the mainstream media, I call them the communications branch of the Democratic Party. They were on an all-right assault against President Trump. Nothing the man did could do no good. I mean, this man, to the dislike of a lot of his constituents today, this man created probably the most effective commission and operation in the history of this country, which was Operation Warp Speed. He delivered a vaccine in record time. He pushed labs and hospitals to accommodate, to fight COVID, a pandemic plagued on us by a foreign nation, something that we refuse to acknowledge today, something that President Trump was leading the charge. When people tell me, oh, China owes about $1 trillion of US debt bonds, you know what I say? Oh, we should just dip on the debt and call it even. They did release the plague on us. So, that's just me being facetious and terrible foreign diplomacy there. But again, it's an eye for an eye kind of situation. But back to the stat of suburbs. Look at what happened on Long Island on 2021. Long Island was the reddest wave in the country. From the 2 DA seats, one in each county, to the executive seat that nobody foresaw coming, to flipping little county legislator seats, to flipping little town board seats, like seats that were just not on the table. And these were largely in the 3rd Congressional District. So when I say, if we maintain this district today and we do a reevaluation or a reassessment of the district, it becomes a Republican district. And Trump is a driving force behind that. People are starting to realize the hypocrisy of the mainstream media. Just earlier today, if you go on my Twitter, I shared a video that Benny Johnson put out, and I thought it was startling. CNN's top COVID advisor, forgot her name. She's a doctor, very accomplished. I believe she's of Asian, or ethnicity is Asian, very well spoken and everything. Apparently a very well accredited doctor who has advocated for masks and couldn't wait for her 1 and 4-year-old child to be vaccinated, and couldn't wait for that. And up until December, and then January, her conversation changed. February, you would call her a Republican. If you listen to the video, you'd call her a Republican. I'm not sure we should be quick to jump to giving this to kids. There's not enough time for studies. And it's just like, wow, but you were saying all the opposite things of this. So long story short, the media is understanding that they're failing this president and their party. So before they get terminated for their contract of being the communications branch of the Democrat Party, they're trying to do major damage control, right? I'll give an example of how bad things can get. If a Republican goes on the record and says something, they will twist our words, make headlines saying all sorts of crazy. We'll put out a statement correcting them and telling them that that was not factually correct, but we still get suppressed and nobody publishes our statement. Democrats do that. They issue corrections, apologies, terminate reporters, and all hell breaks loose, and all the networks cross-share. Poor Whoopi, this is what she meant. She should have never been canceled. Cancel culture is such a disease. Although all along, Roseanne Barr wasn't given the same courtesy. What's the difference here? My grandparents.
Double standards are just appalling, right, George? I mean, I thought the exact same thing about Whoopi versus Roseanne. So it's criminal.
It's criminal. It's criminal. It's negligent, and it's a double standard. It's rules for thee, not for me. Conservatives are held to a larger standard and higher standard than Democrats ever have been. We're in the most racially divisive time that this country's been, even so before even during segregation, and it was obvious we were racially divided. I don't think we were that bad as we are today. We're in an all-right civil war, and it's all race driven. It's all Republican versus Democrat driven, and it's just sickening. It's nauseating. Donald Trump did more for this country, for gays, for minorities, for every single community in this country. And he was called a homophobe, a racist, a misogynist, everything. And
they don't understand sarcasm. They don't understand humor. They don't understand tongue in cheek. That's what it boils down to, George.
The worst part is, and I say this often, this man set up probably the most aggressive commission to sweep the globe of anti-gay or anti-homophobic laws in countries where they're hanging them off the sides. And our activists here are screaming for peace for Hamas, peace for Palestine, while they shoot the same people that are clamoring for their protection in New York City, as I like to call my fellow LGBT community people, the pink hair and blue hair people. They're on the streets clamoring for justice for Palestine, while if they were in Palestine, they'd get shot in the head just for being different. While Israel hosts the largest pro-LGBT parade in the world. And Trump was advocating for them. They couldn't accept it. Their hatred built for Trump. Orange Man was so bad, as they would say it, that they couldn't even see the good the guy did for them. So this is the country we live in. And this is why I believe suburbs are going to swing back red and will take at least a decade. And I could be wrong, but put me on the record for saying it will take at least a decade for Democrats to start to make inroads back in the suburbs, because the suburbs of the United States are the ones suffering at the helm of the bad policies of Democrats. And that is why they are all going to flip red, no matter how gerrymandered the districts are.
George, I appreciate your optimism. I do worry because millennials like yourself and myself, we are the minority in terms of supporting, more the right side of the political spectrum. I think a lot of it has to do with ignorance. I think a lot of people are just not tuned into the issues, and the Democrats do a better job marketing to the low information voters, and they get them out to vote. What is the solution to this? And then there's also voter fraud, so they can stuff the ballot boxes for the low propensity voters as long as they're registered. So what are the solutions here, George?
So one of the main solutions in that we fall short on as Republicans, and something that I pride myself in saying I don't, is outreach. If you're campaigning for office and you're always comfortable in the setting you're in, that means you're doing something wrong. If you're comfortable campaigning, you're not going out of your bubble. You need to be in the most uncomfortable settings 100% of the time. I am often in the most uncomfortable settings, having the most uncomfortable conversations. Gets me in a lot of trouble, Mark. I'm not going to lie to you. It gets me a bunch of bad headlines. Look, just recently, and I'm open about this, I was asked, oh, do you support reparations for ADOS? I didn't know what ADOS was. I was educated that ADOS was American descendants of slavery. And I said, well, I'm open to having a conversation about the issue and learning more about what your plight is. And then the headline was George Santos, the conservative case for reparations. I had, as promised, I was open to listening. I had a long 2-hour Zoom conversation with 3 people who claim to be leaders in the movement. And on that conversation, it didn't end well, and it got a little rough as I started to understand what they were asking for, and I started delivering facts of what would happen if any of that went into place. And it turned around, and I put out a statement denouncing, saying, look, I never said I was. I said I was open to a conversation. I will always be open to difficult, uncomfortable conversations stemming from reparations to immigrations. That doesn't mean I support it. And that doesn't mean I'm giving it validation. It means I'm open to listening to the other side and trying to even argue with them my stance of why, and see if they can see my reasoning. Put out a statement, whatever. Long story short, this is just where we are. We need to make that outreach. We need to be uncomfortable. The most uncomfortable we become, the more inroads we make. I have had the privilege of seeing what our great patriot Scott Pressler does in registering people from Democrats to Republican all across this country. The guy is out there. He travels. You look at his schedule. He handwrites it on social media.
I just saw him. I just spoke on the same stage as him the last weekend on Saturday. So he was out here in California.
So I saw he was out there. So like, if there's anyone if anybody needs to look at for inspiration that puts himself in uncomfortable situations, that is the guy. And that is why I learn a lot from seeing people like Scott do these things, because this is a man who makes his mission making this country better through registration. And that's very important. And I reach out. I am in talks with people at all times. I always make it a point to get in front of people, to talk to people who think differently than me. And I'm very persuasive, Mark, and I've been very successful. And I'm no Scott Pressler, let's make that very clear, but I've been very successful at getting people to understand my plight, understand my argument. And actually, I was very proud in 2020 to carry the suburban female vote majority. 51.5% of women in the district voted for me versus a Democrat, even though I lost my election. Do you know how hard it is for Republicans?
George, was that a congressional run?
Congressional run of 2020.
Okay. So
do you know the story of my congressional race in 2020? What happened?
I do not.
Would you like me to tell you?
Yes, real quick, please.
Real quick, I ran a campaign in 2020, announced in June of 2019. Still very raw to the apparatus of politics. I was outspent 7-1. Come election night, little old George here was 5,800 votes ahead of an incumbent, a very powerful incumbent. Following election night, late precincts always have some reporting issues, and when all was said and done, by the next day, I was 10,200 votes ahead. There were 23,000 absentee ballots received by Nassau County and Suffolk County, which were the main counties with absentee ballots. And I looked at those numbers and I said, holy cow, I can do this. So I was invited down to new member orientation, where I spent 2 weeks being trained to be a congressman-elect, have a badge and everything to prove it. I met Congresswoman Young Kim from California, who experienced a very similar story to me. She went to Congress, was in orientation. They said, how we changed the rules. You go back home. I met her there. And as we're there, Governor Cuomo kept changing the rules and eventually allowed 70,000 extra ballots to be added to the count. We unfortunately lost the race.
By a slim margin, though, right? What was the slim margin?
So no, it wasn't slim. At the end of the day, he received 70% of the 93,000 votes.
That's ridiculous.
So it was about 38,000 votes. And look, again, I'll put it this way. As hard as it was for me, I didn't stop. I didn't quit. This time around, I've learned the ways around. I've understood absentee. We're prepared to take this on, and there will be no meddling in this election. I guarantee you that, Mark. I have an army of volunteers behind me, and I'm not backing down.
That's great. Well, I'm excited. Keep me posted. I really want to see how this campaign develops. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. George, is there anything else you want to leave the audience with? Maybe your website and social media where we can follow you. And I have plenty of great material here for my write-up. So I'm super excited because I think you hit some very good points here today, and also gives me a lot of hope for the future of the conservative movement to have young spokespeople like you, especially running in winnable districts. So
absolutely.
Yes, last words.
So thank you for having me. And people can find me at georgeforny.com, and that's George, FORNY.com. And there you'll find my socials. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Santos for Congress, and that's Santos #4 Congress. And I'm I'm always on there. I tend to interact as much as I can. And when I can't, my team's really good at getting back to me with messages. I make it my mission to make sure that every DM gets answered and nobody hangs in DM hell. So anybody trying to reach out to me, I make myself accessible. I answer my email. I'm here for the people. I'm one of the people, for the people, by the people. Mark, it was a pleasure sitting with you tonight.
I love it. Thank you so much, George. And what a great candidate. Super excited. Keep us posted and stay in touch. Okay.
Thank you. You have a great one.
Take care, George. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.